I always loved Friday nights. After my husband, Mark, passed away, they became my quiet sanctuary. A simple dinner, a glass of wine, the comfortable silence of a home that held more memories than furniture. That particular Friday was no different. I was scrolling idly through my social media feed, looking at pictures of my friends' grandchildren, at recipes I would probably never make. When I saw it, the image felt like a punch to the gut, a sudden, brutal theft of the air from my lungs. It was a professional photograph, bathed in the soft, golden light of a setting sun. In it, my son, my only child, Alex, was kissing a radiant bride under a beautiful arch of white roses. The caption, posted by a photographer I had never heard of, read, "A surprise wedding for a beautiful couple, introducing Mr. and Mrs. Miller." The world narrowed to the small, glowing screen in my hands. Mr. and Mrs. Miller. My son, married, and I, his mother, was finding out about it on the internet, tucked between a cat video and an advertisement for garden gnomes. I scrolled frantically through the comments, a tidal wave of congratulations from friends, from family, from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them assuming I was the proud, happy mother of the groom. Each congratulations, Helen, was another twist of the knife. I felt a hot, prickling shame spread across my face. I was not a mother celebrating her son's wedding. I was a secret keeper, a liar by omission, a woman who had just been publicly and profoundly erased from her own son's life. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Alex had been distant lately, yes. His calls had become shorter, his visits less frequent. I had attributed it to the pressures of his new job, to the seriousness of his relationship with his girlfriend, Chloe, a woman who had always treated me with a polite, but distinctly chilly, reserve. I had given them space. I had told myself this was the natural, painful, but necessary process of a son building his own life. I had never, in my wildest, most insecure nightmares, imagined this. This was not a son building a new life. This was a son amputating his old one. I sat there in the dark, the only light in the room the cold, blue glow of my phone, the screen now a testament to my own irrelevance. I didn't cry, not at first. The shock was a dam, holding back the flood of grief. I just sat, completely still, trying to reconcile the smiling, happy man in the photograph with the little boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose bedtime stories I had read, whose entire world, for 22 years, I had been. Then, my phone rang, the sound of violent, jarring intrusion into the silent, shattered space of my living room. It was my cousin, her voice a bright, cheerful sound that felt like an assault. "Helen, I just saw the pictures. Congratulations. Why didn't you tell us Alex was getting married?" And that's when the dam broke. The private humiliation became a public one. The silence in my home was finally filled with a sound. The quiet, heartbreaking, and utterly lonely sound of my own weeping. The weekend was a blur of muted, gray agony. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't respond to the cheerful, congratulatory text messages that continued to pour in, each one a small, sharp grain of salt in a gaping wound. I moved through my house like a ghost, my own home now feeling alien and unfamiliar. Every object was a memory, every memory a fresh betrayal. I saw the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger, smiling me, my late husband Mark, and a 10-year-old Alex, his face bright with a gap-toothed grin, his arms slung around my neck. We were a team then, a tight, unbreakable unit of 3. After Mark's sudden death, we had become a unit of 2. Our bond forged even stronger in the fires of our shared grief. I had thought that bond was invincible. I had been a fool. My mind became a relentless, tortuous courtroom, replaying the last few years, searching for clues, for the exact moment when the fracture had begun. I saw it now with a devastating, heartbreaking clarity. It had started with Chloe. She was beautiful, ambitious, from a world of wealth and privilege that was a universe away from the quiet, middle-class life I had built for my son. When Alex first brought her home, I had tried to be welcoming. I had cooked her favorite meal, had asked her about her life, her dreams, but her answers were always polite, vague, and tinged with a subtle, condescending chill. She looked around my comfortable, lived-in home not as a place of warmth, but as a museum of a past her future husband needed to escape. She was the one who had encouraged him to take the high-powered job in another city, a 2-hour drive away. It's such a great opportunity for him, Helen, she had said, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. He needs to spread his wings. I had agreed, of course. I wanted him to succeed. I just hadn't realized that, in her mind, I was the cage he needed to escape from. The visits had become less frequent after that. The phone calls grew shorter. When I would ask about their plans, about the future, Alex would be evasive. We're just taking it one day at a time, Mom, he'd say, his voice strained, a new, unfamiliar distance in his tone. I saw it now. The small, polite rejections, the gentle, almost imperceptible way Chloe would steer him away from me at family gatherings. The way she would answer questions that were directed at him. It had not been a sudden amputation. It had been a slow, methodical, and expertly executed campaign of exclusion. And Alex, my strong, intelligent son, had been a willing, or perhaps just a weak, participant. On Sunday evening, my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was not a text message. It was a photo tag. My heart sank. I opened it. It was a new picture. This one from their honeymoon. Alex and Chloe, tan and smiling, were clinking champagne glasses on the balcony of a luxurious, tropical resort, the turquoise ocean a perfect, mocking backdrop. The caption, written by Chloe, was a single, breezy line, paradise found. And then, a few minutes later, a text from Alex himself finally arrived. It was not the heartfelt apology, the desperate explanation I had been hoping for. It was a picture of the same beach, and a single, casual, and utterly devastating message. Hope you're not too mad. It all just happened so fast. We'll explain everything when we get back. The casualness of it, the breezy, almost flippant tone, was the final, crushing insult. This was not a thoughtless mistake. This was a calculated, deliberate act of erasure. And in that moment, my grief, my deep, soul-crushing sadness, began to cool, to harden, to transform into something new, something cold, clear, and as sharp as a shard of ice. The anger that replaced my grief was a quiet, cold, and profoundly clarifying thing. It was not a hot, screaming rage. It was the quiet, steady hum of a machine coming online. For a weekend, I had allowed myself to be a victim, a heartbroken mother weeping in the dark. But as I stared at the picture of my son in his sun-drenched, carefree paradise, a different part of me, a part I had not accessed in a very long time, began to awaken. It was the part of me that had single-handedly raised a son after his father's death. It was the part that had worked to jobs to ensure that son had a debt-free college education. It was the part that understood, with a pragmatism forged in hardship, that actions have consequences. On Monday morning, I did not call my friends to cry. I did not text Alex back a string of angry, wounded messages. I put on my best suit, the one I used to wear to my old corporate job before I had quit to raise my son, and I drove to the downtown branch of the Citibank. I sat down not with a teller, but with the bank's vice president, a man who had known my husband, Mark, for years. He offered his condolences, his face a mask of professional sympathy. "What can I do for you, Helen?" he asked. "I'm here to discuss the Miller Family Trust," I said, my voice calm and even. The vice president's polite smile tightened slightly. He knew what that meant. When Mark had died, he had left behind more than just a life insurance policy. He had been a careful, forward-thinking man, a man who had seen the potential for both greatness and foolishness in his young son. He had established a substantial trust fund for Alex, an inheritance that was meant to be the foundation of his future, a down payment on a house, the seed money for a business, a safety net for his own family one day. But Mark had also been wise. He had seen my own strength, my own steady hand, and so, he had included a very specific, ironclad clause in the trust's charter. The money was for Alex, but I, his mother, was to be the sole trustee, the guardian, the gatekeeper, with absolute and total control over all distributions until Alex reached the age of 30. 4 years, I had treated that trust as a sacred duty. I had managed the investments, paid the taxes, and had given Alex a generous but responsible allowance, teaching him the value of money, the importance of hard work. The account was not my money, but I was its protector. I was the guardian of his father's legacy, and I now realized that legacy was not just financial. It was a legacy of values, of family, of respect, values my son had just so casually, so publicly discarded. I'd like to place a temporary administrative hold on all automated distributions from the trust, I told the vice president, and I want to change the protocol for any and all transactions, effective immediately. He listened, his expression unreadable. What new protocol would you like to implement, Helen? From now on, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor of the bank. No funds are to be released, no transfers made, no credit lines honored, without my physical signature, in person, on the withdrawal slip. The vice president was silent for a long moment. He understood the implications perfectly. Helen, he said softly, are you sure? This will effectively freeze all access to the account. I looked at him, my expression unwavering. Yes, I said, I am absolutely sure. Leaving the bank, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of revenge I might have expected. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet calm, the steadying feeling of a ship that had finally found its anchor in a storm. The decision had been made. The consequences were set in motion. And now, all there was to do was wait. I spent the next few days not in a state of anxious anticipation, but in a period of quiet, deliberate rediscovery. My son's betrayal had been a brutal, clarifying event. It had forced me to look at my own life, at the woman I had become in the years since Mark's death, a woman whose identity had been almost entirely consumed by her role as a mother, a guardian, a warrior. Alex had not just excluded me from his new life. He had, in a strange and painful way, given me back my own. I spent the morning in my garden. It was a small, simple patch of earth behind my house, a place Mark and I had cultivated together. After his death, I had kept it alive out of a sense of duty, a living memorial to him. But now, as I knelt in the cool, dark soil, my hands covered in dirt, I felt a different kind of connection. I wasn't just tending to his memory. I was nurturing something for myself. The scent of the damp earth, the feel of a stubborn weed giving way in my hand, the sight of a new, bright green shoot pushing its way towards the sun. It was all so beautifully, wonderfully real. It was a wealth that could not be frozen, a value that could not be quantified in a bank account. It was the simple, profound richness of life itself, a richness I had forgotten how to see. That afternoon, I called my two oldest friends, women who had seen me through every triumph and every tragedy of my life, the kind of friends who don't need explanations, who just show up. We met for lunch at our favorite small cafe, a place filled with the comfortable clatter of silverware and conversation. I told them everything. I told them about the photograph, the text message, the trip to the bank, and they did not offer judgment or advice. They simply listened. They let me pour out my grief, my anger, my confusion, and when I was done, one of them reached across the table and took my hand. We're so sorry you're hurting, Helen, she said, but we are not sorry to see the fighter we always knew was in there come out. In their unwavering, unconditional support. I felt a different kind of legacy, not one of money passed down from a husband, but one of love and loyalty built over a lifetime of shared experiences. I was beginning to remember who I was before I was just Alex's mom. I was a woman who had her own friends, her own passions, her own strength. The quiet, lonely evenings that had once been filled with a low-grade worry about my son were now filled with the things I loved. I read the books I had been meaning to read for years. I listened to the old jazz records Mark and I had collected. I cooked meals for myself, not out of necessity, but for the pure, simple joy of it. I was rebuilding my own life, not out of spite, but out of a newfound sense of self-worth. I was creating a home that was a sanctuary for me, not just a launching pad for my son. On Thursday, a postcard arrived. It was a glossy, vibrant image of a perfect, turquoise ocean, and a pristine, white sand beach. On the back, in Chloe's elegant, impersonal handwriting, were a few, breezy words. Life is perfect. Wish you were here. But also, not really. Lol. Having the time of our lives. I looked at the picture, at the perfect, manufactured paradise, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. Their idea of a perfect life was a 5-star resort, a temporary escape from reality funded by someone else's hard work. My idea of a perfect life was here, in the rich soil of my garden, in the warm laughter of my friends, in the quiet, steady strength I was rediscovering in myself. The postcard was a message from a world I no longer envied. It was a reminder of a different kind of poverty, a poverty of the soul that no amount of money could ever cure. I put the postcard in a drawer, a final artifact from a chapter of my life that was now definitively closed. It was Saturday afternoon. I was in my garden, my hands covered in the rich, dark soil, a feeling of quiet contentment settling over me. The sun was warm on my back, the scent of lavender and roses hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my mind was blessedly, wonderfully quiet. I was not worrying about Alex. I was not replaying the painful memories of the past week. I was simply present, a woman tending to her small patch of earth. And then, my phone rang, its sharp, digital trill a violent intrusion into my analog peace. I wiped my hands on my jeans and pulled it from my pocket. The name on the screen made my heart give a single, hard jolt. Alex. I stared at the name for a long moment, a lifetime of maternal instinct warring with my newfound, cold resolve. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring until it went to silence, to treat him with the same casual dismissal he had shown me. But another part, the part that would always be his mother, knew I had to answer. This was not a social call. This was the call I had been waiting for. I took a deep, steadying breath, a prayer for strength, and I answered. "Hello, Alex," I said, my voice calm, even, and utterly neutral. The voice on the other end was not the breezy, carefree tone of his last text message. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, the voice of a frightened little boy. Mom, thank God you answered." He was speaking quickly, his words tumbling over one another in a frantic, panic torrent. "Something's wrong. We're at the hotel. We were trying to check out, and they declined the card. All of them. They said the account has been frozen." I could hear Chloe's sharp, angry voice in the background, a high-pitched counterpoint to Alex's rising panic. "The hotel manager is here, Mom," Alex continued, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "He's talking about calling the police. He says we have to pay the bill, but we can't. Everything is on that card. The flights home, everything. You have to fix this. You have to call the bank. Please, Mom, you have to do something. Now." I listened to his panicked, entitled plea, and I felt nothing but a profound, aching sadness. He was not asking for my help. He was demanding a solution. He was not speaking to his mother, the woman he had so brutally cast aside. He was speaking to the administrator of his trust fund, the faceless financial entity that had always, silently, cleaned up his messes. He still didn't understand. He thought this was a mistake, a clerical error, a problem that could be solved with a simple phone call. He had no idea that this was not an error. It was a consequence. I let the silence on the line stretch out for a long, deliberate moment. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to feel the terror of being alone, of being without a safety net, if only for a few seconds. "The account isn't frozen, Alex," I said finally, my voice as calm and quiet as the garden around me. I could hear his audible sigh of relief on the other end. "Oh, thank God," he started. "So what is it? Can you just—" I cut him off. "It's not frozen," I repeated. "It's closed, and I'm the only one with the key." The silence that followed was of a different kind. It was not the silence of a bad connection. It was the profound, deafening, and absolute silence of a carefree, sun-drenched paradise suddenly and completely collapsing. "The honeymoon is over," I said, my voice not of anger, not of triumph, but of a simple, unshakable finality. "Come home." I ended the call and stood there in the quiet, sunlit garden, the silence of my own backyard a stark contrast to the frantic, panicked world I had just upended thousands of miles away. The phone in my hand felt unnaturally heavy, a small, dense object that had just become a lever, shifting the entire balance of power in my small family. A part of me, a primal, wounded part, had expected to feel a surge of triumphant, righteous satisfaction. I had expected to feel the sweet, sharp thrill of revenge, but I felt none of that. Instead, a profound wave of sadness washed over me, so deep and so aching it almost buckled my knees. This was my son, my child, and I had just, with a few calm words, pulled the entire foundation of his world out from under him. The act, however necessary, was not one of victory. It was an act of profound, heartbreaking grief. I walked back into my house, the familiar comfort of its rooms now feeling different, charged with the weight of what I had done. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had helped Alex with his homework, where we had shared 1,000 meals, where we had grieved for his father together, and I allowed myself to imagine their new reality. The initial, stunned silence on the phone would have given way to a frantic, furious argument. I could picture it perfectly. Chloe, her face a mask of disbelief and rage, would have turned on Alex, her voice a venomous whisper. "What do you mean?" She closed it. "Your mother can't do that. This is your money, fix it." And Alex, my son, who had always been so confident, so insulated by the quiet, invisible armor of his father's legacy, would have been utterly, completely lost. Their luxurious, five-star paradise would have transformed, in an instant, into a gilded cage. The smiling, deferential hotel staff would have become polite but firm jailers. The manager, no longer a gracious host, would be a man with a ledger and a phone, one call away from the local police. The fantasy was over. The bill had come due, and for the first time in his life, my son had no way to pay it. The journey home, I knew, would be a masterclass in humiliation, a slow, grinding descent from their self-perceived royalty to the common, humbling ground of ordinary people. The first-class flights would have to be cancelled. The expensive, matching luggage would become a heavy, cumbersome burden. I imagined them in the harsh, fluorescent lights of the airport, their tans already beginning to fade under the stress, arguing in hushed, angry tones at the ticket counter. They would have to call friends, perhaps even Chloe's parents, their voices stripped of all pride, begging for money, for a loan to buy 2 economy-class tickets home. They would be crammed into the middle seats, surrounded by the very people they had so effortlessly floated above just days before. The journey would be long, filled with uncomfortable silences and simmering resentments. Chloe would blame Alex. Alex, perhaps for the first time, would be forced to confront the true cost of the choices he had made, the choices she had encouraged him to make. He had traded his family for a fantasy, and the fantasy had just evaporated at 30,000 feet. This was not an act of cruelty on my part. It was an act of love, a hard, painful, and necessary love. It was the only lesson I had left to teach him. I had raised him to be a good man, a kind man, a man who understood the value of loyalty and respect. I had thought those lessons had taken root, but I now saw that the soft, easy soil of his privilege had allowed him to grow tall, but not strong. He had been sheltered from the consequences of his actions for his entire life. First by his father's wealth, and then by my unwavering, unconditional support. The wall I had so carefully built to protect him from the world's harshness had also, I now realized, prevented him from ever truly growing up. My act of closing the account was not about taking away his money. It was about taking away the wall. It was about forcing him, for the first time, to stand on his own 2 feet, to face a world that did not bend to his will, to feel the cold, hard ground of reality. It was a terrible, necessary gift, the kind only a parent can give. As the evening wore on, the sadness began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. I had done what needed to be done. The ball was now in his court. He would come home, and he would be angry. He would be hurt, but he would also, I hoped, be different. He would be a man who had been forced to look into the abyss of a life without a safety net. A man who had been humbled, and in that humility, there might be a chance for a new kind of conversation, a real conversation, about the true meaning of family, of legacy, of a wealth that could not be measured in a bank account. Late that night, a short, cold text message from Alex finally arrived. It was not an apology. It was not a question. It was a simple, stark statement of fact. We've landed. We will be at your house tomorrow. The confrontation was coming, and for the first time in a week, I felt ready for it. The next day dawned gray and overcast, the sky a perfect mirror of the heavy, somber mood that had settled over my house. I spent the morning preparing not as a mother expecting her son, but as a general preparing for a difficult negotiation. I didn't bake his favorite cookies or prepare a welcoming meal. I simply made a fresh pot of coffee and sat at my dining room table, a place of countless happy family dinners, which now felt like a cold, polished battlefield. I was not angry anymore. The raw, hot emotions of the past week had cooled and settled into a kind of quiet, sad clarity. I knew what I had to say. I knew what needed to be done. And I knew it would be one of the hardest things I had ever had to do. They arrived just after noon. The expensive rental car they pulled up in, no doubt paid for by Chloe's parents, was the only sign of their former, gilded life. When they walked through the door, the change in them was palpable. They were a world away from the radiant, carefree couple in the honeymoon photographs. Alex was pale and haggard, the deep tan on his face now a sickly, yellowed color under the stress. His eyes, when they met mine, were a confusing mixture of shame, resentment, and the pleading look of a lost little boy. Chloe, however, was a different story. The polite, chilly mask she usually wore was gone, replaced by a look of open, undisguised hostility. She was a queen whose kingdom had just been unceremoniously taken from her, and she had come here not for a reconciliation, but for a war. "How could you?" she began, her voice a low, furious hiss, foregoing any pretense of a greeting. "How could you do that to him, to us, stranding us in a foreign country, humiliating us?" She spoke as if I were a negligent financial advisor, not a mother. She was the one who had orchestrated my exclusion, who had treated me with a cold, dismissive contempt. Yet in her mind, she was the victim, her perfect, Instagrammable honeymoon ruined by my petty, vindictive act. Alex stood beside her, silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, a subordinate in his own marriage, a spectator in his own life. I let her tirade wash over me, the angry, entitled words feeling distant and strangely irrelevant. I did not rise to the bait. I did not defend myself. I simply waited until her initial, furious volley had exhausted itself. When she finally fell silent, her chest heaving with a self-righteous anger, I looked past her, directly at my son. "Is that what you believe, Alex?" I asked, my voice quiet. "That I did this to humiliate you?" He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a miserable, conflicted pain. I don't know what to think, Mom," he stammered. "Why would you do it? It was my money. Dad left it for me." "Your father," I said, my voice still quiet but now infused with a new, hard edge, "left you a legacy. And you, both of you, have treated that legacy, and his memory, with a breathtaking disrespect." I spoke of his father's hard work, of the values he had tried to instill in his son, the values of loyalty, of family, of showing up for the people who love you. I spoke of my own sacrifices, the years I had dedicated to ensuring he had every opportunity, the love and support I had poured into his life, not as a transaction, but as a gift. "A family is not a business, Chloe," I said, turning to her, my gaze steady. "You don't just acquire a husband, you join a family, and you have done everything in your power to dismantle this one." I did not raise my voice. My calm, quiet recitation of the facts was far more devastating than any screaming match could ever have been. I laid the anatomy of their betrayal bare on the table. The secret wedding, the public humiliation, the breezy, dismissive text message from paradise. I wasn't just talking about a frozen bank account. I was talking about a broken heart. I was talking about a son who had allowed his new wife to convince him that his own mother was a disposable piece of his past, an inconvenience to be managed and eventually discarded. As I spoke, I saw a flicker of something in Alex's eyes, a dawning, horrified understanding. He was finally seeing his own actions, not through the flattering filter of his new wife's ambition, but through the clear, unforgiving lens of his mother's pain. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece. I picked up the old, framed photograph, the one of me, of Mark, of a happy, 10-year-old Alex. I brought it back to the table and placed it gently in the center, facing my son. "This," I said, my voice now soft with a deep, aching sadness, "is the price of admission to that trust fund. This family, this history, this love, a love you have to choose to be a part of, a family you have to show up for, and in the most important moment of your life, you chose to exclude me from it." I looked at him, my heart aching for the boy in the picture, and the lost man sitting before me. "The money is still there, Alex," I said. But the lock has been changed. And this, I tapped the photograph, is the only key. The small, framed photograph on the table was not just an object. It was a verdict. It was a silent, powerful testament to a time when our family had been a circle, whole and unbroken. Alex stared at it, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. I could see the war in his eyes, the pull of 100 happy childhood memories warring with the new, powerful allegiance he had pledged to the woman standing beside him. Chloe, however, saw the photograph not as a memory, but as a negotiating tactic, a piece of emotional blackmail. She let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound as sharp and brittle as breaking glass. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice dripping with a contempt she no longer bothered to hide. "You're holding his inheritance hostage in exchange for what? Forced family dinners? Mandatory holiday appearances? You think you can buy his love with his own money?" Her words were designed to be cruel, to paint me as a lonely, manipulative old woman, clinging to a son who had outgrown her. And for a moment, they hit their mark. A hot flush of shame and anger rose in my chest. Was that what I was doing? Was this just a petty, vindictive power play? I took a deep breath, pushing the doubt away, anchoring myself in the cold, hard clarity that had guided me since the moment I had made the call to the bank. This was not about forcing their love. This was about teaching them the cost of disrespect. "This isn't a negotiation, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's an orientation." It seems Alex has forgotten the terms and conditions of being a part of this family. So I'm simply reminding him. I turned my full attention back to my son, ignoring the furious glare from my new daughter-in-law. "Your father's legacy isn't just the money in that account, Alex," I said, my voice softening. "That's just the paper, the ink. The real legacy is the story that paper is supposed to fund. A story of family, of loyalty, of showing up for each other not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard." I laid out my terms. They were not punishments. They were, in my mind, the basic, fundamental requirements of being a son, of being a member of a family. "I'm not asking for your love," I told him. "That is something that has to be given freely. And it's clear you've chosen to give yours elsewhere. I'm asking for your respect, the respect I am owed as your mother, and the respect you owe to the memory of your father." My terms were simple, almost insultingly so. A phone call, once a week, not a text, but a real conversation. A visit, once a month, not a flying, duty-bound visit, but a real visit, where he was present and engaged. And participation in the two most important family holidays of the year, Thanksgiving and Christmas. "That's it," I concluded. "Those are the terms. You do those things. You show up and you act like a son who is a part of this family. And you will have full, unfettered access to the financial legacy your father left you. You choose to continue to treat me as an inconvenient footnote in your new life. And that account will remain exactly where it is. A well-managed but inaccessible monument to what you have lost." I leaned back in my chair, my part in the negotiation over. I had laid the choice bare. It was not a choice between me and Chloe. It was a choice between a life of easy, transactional relationships and a life of meaningful, if sometimes difficult, connection. Chloe was apoplectic. "This is insane," she seethed, turning to Alex, her face a mask of furious disbelief. "She is treating you like a child. We don't need her money, Alex. My parents can help us. We can build our own life, a life that doesn't come with all these strings." She was right, of course. They could, but her words revealed her true nature with a stark, unflattering clarity. To her, this was all about the money, the idea of investing time, of showing up for a family that wasn't hers by blood, was a cost she was unwilling to pay. She saw family not as a source of strength, but as a liability, a drain on their resources, a distraction from the more important business of building their perfect, upwardly mobile life. "Tell her, Alex," Chloe demanded, her voice now sharp with a command. "Tell her we don't need her or her ridiculous, controlling terms. Tell her." She had made a critical, fatal miscalculation. She had tried to turn it into a battle of wills between the two women in his life. But I had been very careful not to make it about that. I had made it about him, about his character, about the man his father had raised him to be. The choice was not mine or hers to make. It was his. And as he looked from his furious, demanding new wife, to the quiet, unwavering face of his mother, to the small, smiling ghost in the photograph on the table, Alex was finally, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly on his own. The silence that descended upon the dining room was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, filled with the immense, unspoken weight of a young man's entire life being brought to a single, critical decision point. My son, Alex, stood trapped in the crossfire between the two opposing forces of his life, the quiet, foundational love of his past and the bright, ambitious promise of his future. He looked at Chloe, his beautiful, furious new wife, her face a mask of impatient expectation. Then he looked at me, his mother, my face calm and steady, offering no pressure, only a quiet, unwavering truth. And finally, his gaze fell to the photograph on the table, to the smiling, 10-year-old boy who had known nothing of such impossible choices. I could almost see the gears of his mind turning, the frantic, desperate calculation of a man trying to find a path that would not result in the complete and utter devastation of his world. For a long, agonizing moment, he did what he had always done when faced with a difficult choice. He said nothing. He was a man who had been sheltered his entire life, a man for whom the difficult decisions had always been made by others, first by his strong, decisive father, then by his loving, overprotective mother, and now, I saw with a painful clarity, by his new, iron-willed wife. He had floated through life on a current of privilege and good intentions, his path smoothed by a love and a legacy he had never been forced to truly earn. Now, for the first time, the current had vanished. He was adrift in a dead, silent sea, and for the first time, he was being asked to pick up the oars and row for himself. Alex, for God's sake, say something. Chloe finally snapped, her patience completely gone. Tell her, this is not a negotiation. We are not going to be summoned here like children to get our allowance. We are adults. We are married. Tell her. Her words were a command. The tone she had undoubtedly used to orchestrate their secret wedding, to convince him that excluding me was a necessary, modern act of creating boundaries. It was the voice of a woman who was used to getting her way, who saw this not as a family crisis, but as a hostile takeover of her new asset, my son. I watched Alex's face. I saw him flinch at her sharp, commanding tone. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a dawning, uncomfortable realization. He was seeing her, perhaps for the first time, not as the beautiful, confident woman who had swept him off his feet, but as a stranger, a woman whose values were a world away from the ones he had been raised with. He looked at her, then back at me, and in his gaze, I saw the ghost of a question. Who have I become? He finally took a breath, and I steeled myself for the inevitable. I expected him to side with her, to choose the shiny, new promise over the old, familiar bond. And I was prepared for it. I had made my peace with that possibility in the long, lonely hours of the past week. I would be hurt, but I would not be broken. I had rediscovered my own strength, my own world. I would survive. But the words that came out of his mouth were not the ones I expected. She's right, Chloe, he said, his voice a low, rough, and unfamiliar sound. It was the voice of a man, not a boy. Chloe stared at him, her mouth falling slightly open in disbelief. What? She's right, he repeated, a new, strange strength in his voice. He finally looked me directly in the eye, and for the first time since he had walked through the door, I saw not shame or resentment, but a deep, profound, and heartbreaking clarity. I was a coward, he said, the words a quiet, raw confession. There is no excuse. There is no explanation. What I did, what we did, was cruel, and it was a betrayal of everything Dad ever taught me, of everything you ever taught me. He turned to his wife, and in that moment, I saw him become a husband. We can't build a life together on a foundation of disrespect, Chloe, he said, his voice now gentle but firm. We have to fix this, not because of the money, but because it's the right thing to do. And then he turned back to me, his eyes now shining with unshed tears. I am so sorry, Mom, he whispered, the words finally, truly, coming from his heart. Not for the money. I am so sorry for hurting you. I am so sorry I let you find out that way. I am so sorry. It was Chloe's turn to be silent. The shock on her face was absolute. This was not a scenario she had planned for. Her partner, her subordinate, had just staged a quiet, unexpected coup. She looked from Alex's tear-streaked, resolute face to my own calm, unwavering one. She saw a united front, a bond she had tried to break but had, in her arrogance, only managed to temper into something stronger. She opened her mouth to say something, another sharp, cutting remark, but no words came out. Without a sound, she turned, grabbed her expensive handbag from the chair, and walked out the front door, slamming it shut behind her. The sound echoed through the quiet house, a definitive, final crack in the foundation of their new marriage, and my son and I were left standing in the wreckage. The sound of the slamming door was a violent, jarring end to one chapter, and a quiet, uncertain beginning to another. Alex and I stood in the heavy silence of the dining room, the space between us filled with the ghosts of 100 unspoken emotions. He didn't move to go after her. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, the brief, hard-won strength of his confession now collapsing under the weight of its consequences. He had done the right thing, the brave thing, but it had cost him, perhaps, his new marriage. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a lost, pleading expression. "What do I do now?" he whispered, the question not of a man, but of the small boy from the photograph. A boy who had just broken his favorite toy, and was looking to his mother to fix it. And in that moment, my heart ached with a fierce, protective love. My cold, hard resolve melted away, replaced by the deep, instinctual, and unending love of a mother for her child. He had made a terrible mistake. He had been weak, and he had been cruel. But he was my son, and he had just taken the first, most difficult step back home. I walked over to him and did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled him into a hug. At first, he was stiff, surprised, a man unused to this kind of simple, unconditional comfort. And then, he just let go. His body shook with quiet, racking sobs. The repressed grief and shame of the past week finally breaking free. He was not just crying for his mistake. He was crying for his lost father, for the man he had failed to be. And I just held him, my own tears silently soaking into the shoulder of his shirt. Mourning with him, for us. We did not try to solve the problem of Chloe that day. There were no grand strategies, no discussions of divorce lawyers or marital counseling. There was only the quiet, patient work of mending a broken bond. We made coffee, we sat at the kitchen table, and we talked. We really talked, for the first time in what felt like years. He told me about the pressure he had felt, about his insecurity in Chloe's wealthy, sophisticated world, about how her confident, decisive nature had been both an allure and a crutch. He did not make excuses, but he offered explanations, and I listened. And I, in turn, told him about the profound, public humiliation of seeing that photograph, about the feeling of being erased, of having my entire life as his mother reduced to an inconvenient, forgotten chapter. And he listened. It was a painful, necessary, and ultimately healing conversation. We were finding our way back to each other. Not as a mother and a child, but as two adults, flawed and wounded, bound by a history that was stronger than any mistake. The story does not end with a perfect, fairy tale resolution. Life is rarely so neat. Chloe did not come back that day, or the next. The weeks that followed were a difficult, painful negotiation, a slow, arduous process of a young couple trying to figure out if the foundation of their new marriage was strong enough to withstand its first, seismic crack. There were arguments, there were tears, there were long, difficult conversations, but there was also a change. Alex, my Alex, was no longer a passive participant. He was a partner. He was fighting for his marriage. Yes, but he was also fighting for himself, for the man of integrity he wanted to be. And I, in turn, did the hardest thing a mother can do. I stepped back. I did not interfere. I did not offer advice. I simply let them know that my door and my heart were open. The final scene is 6 months later. It is a Sunday. The late afternoon sun is streaming into my dining room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The table is full. I am at one end, and Alex is at the other. And in the middle, helping me serve the roast I have just taken out of the oven, is Chloe. She is quieter now, her sharp, confident edges softened by a new, hard-won humility. Her smile is still a little hesitant, a little uncertain, but it is there. The journey back for her and Alex had been a long one. It had involved counseling, difficult compromises, and the painful, necessary work of rebuilding trust. But they were here. They were trying. As we sit down to eat, a comfortable, easy silence settles over the table for a moment. Then, Alex raises his glass. "To my mom," he says, his eyes meeting mine across the table, his gaze clear, steady, and filled with a love that is no longer just a memory, but a living, breathing presence. The best and toughest financial advisor I've ever had. We all laugh, a real, genuine sound that fills the room. It is not an ending. It is a new beginning. I know the path ahead for them, for us, will not always be smooth. There will be other storms, other challenges. But as I look at the full table, at the beautiful, flawed, and resilient family we are choosing to be, I know, with a profound and lasting peace, that we will face them together. The legacy Mark had left was not the money in the bank. It was this. It was the love that was strong enough to break, and then strong enough to heal.